Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The shuttle's hull rattled as it broke through the thin atmospheric veil of Outpost Sharon. A sound Elias Rourke had never grown used to despite 2 decades of interstellar travel. The seat harness dug into his collarbone. He tried adjusting it, but the restraint's locking mechanism refused to budge, a reminder that comfort was never a priority on transport shuttles. Efficiency was. The woman seated across from him, a security officer with eyes like smoked glass, hadn't spoken since boarding. That was the tone of Sharon, he'd been told. Brisk, clinical, and suspicious of anyone who wasn't here to guard or dissect something. When the shuttle thudded into the docking clamps, Elias's heartbeat quickened. Stepping off into the station's airlock was like walking into the lungs of a machine. The recycled oxygen carried the faint tang of ozone, mingled with the antiseptic bite of sterilizing agents. Behind the reinforced glass partitions, personnel in slate-gray uniforms moved with the unhurried precision of those who understood exactly where they were in the hierarchy and where you were not. He kept his gaze ahead as he followed the small, welcoming party, 2 station guards and an administrative aide. To processing, the aide, a thin man whose skin looked as if it had been ironed flat by years of artificial lighting, scanned Elias's credentials. Maintenance, systems calibration, 6-month contract. The aide recited. His tone was neutral, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the guards as though to confirm whether Elias should be treated as a potential threat. The guards didn't react. They were the kind of soldiers whose composure was carved from habit. We'll run you through safety protocols before you're cleared to access your assigned zones, the aide continued. There's one area you will not, under any circumstances, enter without explicit clearance. Hangar 9. The name lodged itself in Elias's mind like a splinter. What's in Hangar 9? He asked, though his tone was casual enough to pass as idle curiosity. The aide didn't answer directly. We'll go over restricted sectors and orientation, he said, then turned his focus back to the terminal. The conversation was over, at least from his perspective. The barracks wing was quiet, almost too quiet, as Elias unpacked his belongings. He had a small stack of maintenance manuals, a dented metal mug, and a faded hollow picture of a wheat field from his home colony. The cot's mattress was thin, the pillow thinner, but neither mattered. The hum of the station's energy core thrummed faintly through the bulkheads, a constant reminder of the distance from any true sky. It was during his first scheduled systems check, 3 days into his contract, that Elias encountered the first whisper. The repair crew he was shadowing had taken a detour through a storage corridor. A grizzled tech named Vargo, whose beard looked older than some of the equipment they maintained, spoke in a half-whisper to no one in particular. "You hear about her?" he muttered while tightening a coupling. "Her?" another tech asked. Vargo's lips curled into something between a smirk and a shiver. "In 9. The other tech made a slicing gesture across his throat. "Not here. Not now." Elias pretended to focus on his datapad, but the conversation lodged itself in his mind. Later that night, over the dry heat of the mess hall's nutrient paste, he noticed 2 off-duty guards at the next table. Their words were muffled, but he caught enough to piece together fragments. 30 feet tall, tore the hull apart. Only reason she's breathing is command wants her breathing. The image was absurd, yet it refused to dissolve. 30 feet? That wasn't a prisoner. That was a nightmare made tangible. Days passed before he was assigned work in proximity to Hangar 9. The bulkhead outside it was thicker than any he'd seen, reinforced with layered alloys and embossed hazard symbols in 3 languages. He wasn't supposed to look inside, but as he passed, he caught a glimpse through the viewport. She was there, chained at the wrists, ankles, and neck. The alien giantess sat on the hangar floor like a monument toppled into captivity. Her skin shimmered faintly under the harsh white lights, not quite silver, not quite opal. Strands of hair, molten in hue, neither fully gold nor copper, spilled over her shoulders, hiding part of her face. Her eyes, though, were uncovered. They tracked him the moment he appeared, pupils narrowing in a way that suggested not mere observation, but assessment. The gaze wasn't wild. It was steady, deliberate, and far too intelligent for the way the guard spoke of her. He kept walking. He told himself it was because he had work to do. In truth, it was because something in that gaze made him feel exposed, as though she could see the fault lines in him at a glance. That night, the image of her refused to leave his mind. The next morning, during a routine systems check in an adjacent bay, he overheard two guards discussing her fasting schedule with an unsettling tone, half amusement, half cruelty. "She's not fasting," one guard said. "She's starving." The other chuckled. "Command says no food until the transfer order goes through. Might not even need to sedate her for transport if she wastes away first." Elias's stomach nodded. He remembered the famine years back on Alvaron Prime, days when a single nutrient block had to feed 3 people, nights when the ache his gut was almost a comfort because it meant he was still alive. Watching someone wither in chains while food was withheld, that wasn't strategy. That was cruelty in its rawest form. By the 3rd night, he stopped pretending he could ignore it. He found himself in the storage bay after hours, stuffing a few ration packs into his tool satchel under the pretense of organizing supplies. His pulse climbed with each step toward Hangar 9. The security cameras in the corridor tracked him, but maintenance workers were granted partial after-hours access for urgent repairs. He banked on that plausible deniability, holding long enough. The hangar doors hissed open. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with a faint scent of metal and something sharper, ozone perhaps from the restraint's energy fields. She was awake, her gaze finding him instantly. The chains rattled softly as she shifted, a sound like distant thunder. Her expression was unreadable. He approached slowly, each step deliberate. His throat felt dry. He set the ration packs down just beyond the circle of her chains. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with a slow grace that belied her size, she reached forward. Her fingers, long and ridged with faint bioluminescent lines, brushed the edge of the pack. She tore it open with effortless precision. The sound of her eating was almost inaudible, but the way her shoulders eased told him more than words could. For the first time, she looked directly into his eyes, and something shifted in the air between them. Something dangerous. Something necessary. Then the motion sensor above the bulkhead clicked red. An alert tone chimed, sharp and insistent. Elias froze, heart hammering, as the sound of approaching boots echoed in the corridor. "If you want, I can continue directly into Section 2 with this momentum, so the pacing and tension flow seamlessly without you having to stitch them together later." The boots came first, sharp, synchronized impacts on the steel deck. Then the voice of Commander Cray, clipped and carrying the weight of someone who had built a career on other people's mistakes. "Rourke," he barked, the sound bouncing off the hangar walls like a hammer strike. Elias turned, keeping his body between the ration packs and the commander's view, though he doubted the gesture fooled anyone. 2 armed guards flanked Cray, their weapons held low but ready. Ravari's gaze never left Elias, though her hand still mid-motion, the half-empty ration pack resting in her palm. The low, almost subsonic rumble in her chest might have been a warning or curiosity. Cray strode closer, his eyes narrowing. Maintenance crew doesn't belong in 9 without a work order. You got 3 seconds to explain yourself. Elias swallowed, feeling the weight of those seconds pressing against his spine. His mind searched for something plausible, something that could mask the truth without unraveling entirely. "Sensor relay flagged an anomaly on the restraint grid," he said, lifting his datapad slightly. "Figure it was better to check in person than log it for the morning shift." Cray's jaw shifted. Suspicion wore with the faintest flicker of practicality. The commander looked past Elias to the prisoner, whose eyes had not shifted from her unexpected visitor. "If you got an ounce of self-preservation, Rourke," Cray said slowly, "you'll keep your distance. That thing has killed more humans than you've met in your life." His gaze flicked down to the ration pack in Ravari's hand. "And she'll kill for a lot less than food." He turned abruptly. "Guards, escort him out. I'll deal with his access privileges in the morning." The guards herded Elias toward the corridor, but not before he glanced back. Ravari's head tilted slightly, and for an instant, the expression in her eyes was not rage or hunger. It was a quiet, calculating recognition. She had understood what he had done. She might even have understood why. The next morning passed without reprimand, though Elias noticed his key card now required secondary authorization for any access outside maintenance zones. Cray's warning sat heavy in his thoughts, yet the memory of Rivari's gaze lingered like an itch that wouldn't fade. The official narrative painted her as an apex predator, a war criminal in chains. But predators didn't look at you as though weighing your moral worth. Predators didn't starve in silence. 3 days later, the maintenance schedule brought him back to the hangar perimeter. This time, he found the interior dimmed to a shadowed half-light, the restraints humming faintly. She was awake again. As he passed the viewport, her voice, low, husky, and unsteady, slipped into the corridor. Eli! His feet stopped of their own accord. She had spoken his name, not the guttural rasp of a mimic, but an almost human pronunciation, shaped carefully as if she'd been practicing. He stepped to the viewport, keeping his voice low. "How do you know my name?" She leaned forward, the chain links clinking. "I hear guard speak." Her accent was thick, consonants clipped oddly, but the meaning was clear. "You bring food." It was not a question. It was a statement, one anchored in certainty. Elias glanced toward the empty corridor before replying. "Why are they starving you?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in consideration. "Punish. Break. Make weak before move." She hesitated, then added, "Veirathi do not starve enemies. Waste." The word landed heavy, as though she found the concept more alien than he found her. He didn't have time to press for more. The risk of being caught loitering was too high, but her words settled deep, twisting something in him. That night, he returned, not through the main corridor, but via a maintenance conduit that opened behind the observation level. He had stashed more ration packs in his satchel, wrapped in a heat blanket to mask thermal detection. She watched him emerge without surprise. "You return," she said, the phrase more fluent than before. He slid the food within reach, and she took it with a deliberate slowness, as though testing whether the offer came with strings. "My name," she began, then paused to swallow a mouthful. "Rivari." The sound of it was liquid, almost melodic, even in her cautious tone. Elias committed it to memory. "I'm guessing that's not the name they use for you here," he said. "Monster," she replied without hesitation. The word came out sharp, a perfect mimicry of human speech, but the bitterness behind it was her own. As she ate, she spoke in fragments, offering glimpses of story that didn't match the propaganda he'd heard. She spoke of her homeworld, its oceans lit from beneath by vast reef cities, of the fleet she had commanded not to invade, but to intercept human warships encroaching on their system, of her capture in the chaos after an orbital strike she claimed had killed more civilians than soldiers. Each fragment was a puzzle piece, and the more pieces Elias gathered, the more the picture contradicted everything he'd been told. He began to see the possibility that the official reports were not history, but weaponized narrative. And with each shared word, Rivari's voice grew steadier, her vocabulary broader. She was learning fast, but time was not their ally. One evening, while running diagnostics in the comms hub, Elias overheard 2 officers speaking in low, urgent tones. A new order had come through from Earth. Rivari was to be transferred within the week to a classified facility for final study. No one said what final study meant, but Elias had heard enough about the black site programs to know that prisoners did not emerge from them. The thought of her being hauled away in silence, her voice extinguished before she had fully reclaimed it, coiled tight in his chest. When he saw her that night, he didn't bring food first. He brought the truth. "They're moving you, somewhere you won't come back from." Her reaction was not fear. It was calculation, the tilt of her head, and the narrowing of her eyes, signaling that she was already moving through possibilities. "How many days?" she asked. "Less than 7, he said. The number tasted like a countdown in his mouth, her gaze fixed on his. "Then you decide, Elias Rourke. Feed me or free me." The space between them seemed to stretch in that moment, not with physical distance, but with the weight of a choice he couldn't yet make. Somewhere beyond the hangar walls, the hum of the station's reactors carried on, indifferent to the fact that the next move he made could unravel everything he'd ever known. The days became a ticking clock in Elias's mind, Each shift measured not by hours, but by how many remained before Rivari's transfer. He went through the motions of his assigned work, but every system he calibrated, every conduit he inspected, was now just another map in the escape he was already planning. He didn't tell her outright that he'd made his decision. There was no need. The understanding between them had moved past words. She had asked him to choose, and the choice had been made the moment he first set foot inside Hangar 9 with food in his hands. He began gathering what they would need, a portable rebreather unit. He could modify one from the EVA suits to filter the station's atmosphere into something breathable for her, portable power cells to keep it running until they found a ship, lock overrides for the chains. The standard codes wouldn't do, so he spent 2 consecutive nights in the maintenance encryption bay, pretending to run diagnostics while he duplicated clearance strings onto a concealed data wafer. Every acquisition was a risk, each moment a step further away from the man he had been when he arrived here. On the 5th night before the transfer, he slipped into the maintenance conduit behind the observation deck. Rivari was waiting, her posture that a predator forced to crouch, but ready to spring. The lights caught the bioluminescent ridges on her forearms, faint pulses that seemed to align with her breathing. He set the rebreather on the floor, between them. When we move, you'll need this. It's rigged to your lung capacity, but it'll only last 12 hours without a recharge. She lifted it carefully, her fingers grazing his for a moment. The contact was brief, but it was an unspoken acknowledgement. She trusted him now, and that trust was binding. "We move when?" she asked. 2 nights from now, he said. "Shift rotation leaves a gap between patrol sweeps at 0300. If we miss it, there won't be another chance before they take you." The next 48 hours stretched taut, each moment a potential fracture point. He avoided Cray, avoided anyone who might look too closely at his satchel, avoided the comm channels entirely. When the time came, he approached the hangar through the auxiliary maintenance shaft, his breath tight in his chest. Inside, the chain still held Rivari to the reinforced pylons. He moved a control panel, slotting the data wafer into the access port. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the locks disengaged one by one, the hiss of hydraulic releases echoing through the vast chamber. Rivari rose slowly, not as if she were weak, but as if savoring the act of standing unbound for the first time in weeks. She towered over him, the sheer mass of her frame making the hangar seem suddenly too small. Her head turned toward the corridor, as if sensing the station itself might wake to stop them. "We go," she said, and it was not a suggestion. They moved fast, her strides long and silent despite her size. Elias guided her through the maze of storage bays and maintenance shafts, avoiding the main corridors where patrols would be. Twice, they had to halt as voices approached, and both times Rivari stilled so completely she might have been carved from the same alloy as the bulkheads. The rebreather mask covered the lower half of her face, its faint hum the only sound she made. They were 2 turns from the docking bay when the alarm hit, a sharp, descending tone that sent the air vibrating around them. Somewhere behind, Cray's voice boomed through the station's PA system. "Containment breach in Hangar 9. All units converge on Section C." Elias swore under his breath. The patrol gap had closed faster than he'd anticipated. "Alternate path," Rivari said, her eyes scanning the walls. She pointed to a cargo lift platform, recessed into the deck. Elias accessed the control, overriding the lockdown with a maintenance bypass. The lift dropped them into the lower cargo transit tunnels, a dimly lit stretch that smelled faintly of fuel and cold metal. Here, the bulkheads were older, the seams imperfect. Rivari touched one wall lightly, almost reverently, as if she could feel the station structure like a living thing. A clatter of boots on the upper levels spurred them onward. The docking bay security doors loomed ahead, sealed with a biometric panel. Elias pressed his palm to it, the panel's scanner hesitating before flashing green. One more borrowed clearance string paying off. The door slid open to reveal a row of small cargo skiffs, their hulls dull under the overhead strips. He pointed to the farthest one. "That's our ride." They made it halfway across the bay before a squad of security personnel entered from the opposite end. Weapons came up, shouts echoing across the chamber. Rivari moved before Elias could react, One massive arm swept up a loose cargo crate and hurled it into the squad, scattering them in a crash of splintering metal. Elias sprinted for the skiff's hatch, slamming his hand against the manual override. The door hissed open, and he scrambled inside, turning just in time to see Rivari bound up the ramp with the kind of precision that belied her size. The hatch sealed behind them. Elias dove for the pilot's seat, fingers flying over the console. The engines roared to life, their vibrations shaking through the deck plates. A heavy thud reverberated from the rear. Likely small arms fire against the hatch. "Hold on," he said, though he wasn't sure if he meant to reassure her or himself. The skiff tore free of its docking clamps, momentum pressing them into their seats as it shot toward the black. Through the viewport, Outpost Sharon dwindled, its cold geometry receding into the void. Behind them, the comm system crackled with pursuit orders, but the skiff's outdated transponder meant they were just one more blip in the debris field surrounding the station. Still, Elias knew they weren't safe. Not yet, not even close. Rivari leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "You choose," she said quietly, and Elias understood she meant more than the decision to free her. He had chosen a path that could not be walked backward. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them, a silence thick with the weight of what came next. Somewhere out there lay the Varathi border, and beyond it, the unknown. But here, in this small, stolen craft hurtling away from everything he had ever known, was a certainty that his life now belonged to a story far larger than himself, and one that had only just begun. The stolen skiff cut to the void like a whisper swallowed by the immensity of space. The stars here felt colder than Elias remembered, and the black between them heavier, as though every kilometer carried the weight of pursuit. The vessel's old navigation system painted a dim line toward the outer drift, a maze of abandoned mining outposts and derelict freighters that would serve as their cover. The comm stayed silent, but Elias knew the quiet was deceptive. Karen's security network would already have pushed his name and image to every patrol ship within 5 sectors. Rivari sat opposite him, the rebreather's soft hiss punctuating the hum of the engines. She hadn't spoken since their escape, though her eyes moved constantly, reading the flicker of status lights, mapping the vessel as if committing every bolt and seam to memory. Her sheer presence filled the cramped cabin, yet she carried herself with the economy of someone long accustomed to conserving movement. Elias caught himself studying her, not for her size or alien features, but for the paradox she embodied. A commander in exile, reduced to chains, now poised in an uneasy freedom she might not fully trust. Hours passed before she spoke. "You cannot go back." It wasn't a question. It was a sentence, delivered with the finality of a verdict. He met her gaze across the dim light. "I know." Her expression didn't change, but something eased in her posture, as if his answer confirmed an expectation she'd already accounted for. "Then you must choose where forward is." She rose, moving with a predator's balance despite the skiff's occasional shudder. "Varathi space is not close. Patrols will find us before we reach it." Elias leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. "Then we need a hiding place until the search cools down." He keyed in a series of coordinates. "There's a derelict refueling station in the KLYSS belt. No one's touched it in a decade. We can shelter there, make repairs, plan the next move." The trip to the belt took the better part of a day, the silence between them broken only by functional exchanges, adjusting course, monitoring the rebreather, rationing fuel. When they emerged into the belt's slow waltz of rock and shadow, the station came into view, a dark, skeletal structure drifting against the glitter of distant suns. Docking was a careful dance through debris and ice fragments, but soon the skiff's clamps latched onto cold metal. The air inside was stale but breathable, the corridors coated with a fine grit of years untended. They set up in the central hub, Elias activating a low-level power cycle to keep the heat functional without drawing much attention. Rivari removed the rebreather, stretching her neck as though savoring the act of breathing without mechanical aid. She walked the perimeter of the hub slowly, fingers trailing along the walls, pausing at rusted panels like she was reading their history through touch alone. "You should rest," Elias said, lowering himself into a chair pulled from its bracket. She glanced over her shoulder, and for the first time since they had left Sharon, a faint expression touched her face. something near amusement. "And you?" she asked. "I'll keep watch for a while." But sleep didn't come easily when it was his turn. Even here, far from the outpost, his dreams were broken by flashes of boots on steel, alarms wailing, Cray's voice like a blade through the air. Each time he woke, the station's metal groan reminded him they were still balanced on a thin edge between freedom and capture. It was 2 days later when the edge gave way. A proximity alarm shrilled in the hub, and the console's display painted the silhouette of an incoming vessel. Human military design, smaller than a destroyer, but armed enough to cripple them. Elias's hands flew over the controls, initiating a cold ship protocol to mask their heat signature, but it was too late. The patrol ship hailed them on an open channel. "Unregistered vessel. This is Commander Salas of the Hegemony Patrol Ship Sentinel. Power down and prepare to be boarded." Elias's pulse thudded in his ears. Rivari stepped to his side, reading the transmission with a narrowed gaze. "They will kill me," she said plainly. "And you." Her hand hovered near the manual override for the skiff's docking clamps. "If we run, they'll just chase us," Elias said. He toggled the comms, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Sentinel, this is Elias Rourke. You're holding a false warrant. The prisoner you seek is not your enemy." The reply came sharp. "You'll get to make that case in custody." The docking alarms began to sound. Rivari moved between him and the hatch, her stance shifting into something defensive, her bioluminescent lines flaring faintly beneath her skin. "You hide," she said, though her tone made it clear she knew he wouldn't. The boarding hatch cycled open in a hiss of pressure. For armored soldiers advanced, weapons raised. Rivari surged forward, her movement a blur for someone her size, intercepting the first two with a sweep of her arm that sent them crashing into bulkhead. A stun round struck her side. She staggered but did not fall, pivoting to shield Elias from the remaining gunfire. "Stop," Elias shouted into the open comm channel. "You want her dead, you'll have to shoot through me." His words hung in the charged air, the soldiers hesitating for a fraction of a second too long. That was all it took for Commander Salas's voice to cut back in, tight with irritation. "Stand down. All units, hold position." The soldiers lowered their weapons by degrees, though the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. "You have 1 minute," Salas said. "Convince me she's worth letting live." Elias stepped forward, still within the shelter of Rivari's looming form. "You've been fed the same lies I was. That she's a killer, a threat, a thing. But I've seen her starved in chains when they could have just executed her. Why keep her alive unless they fear the truth she carries? Ask her what happened on the day they claim she slaughtered civilians. Hear it from her mouth before you pass sentence." The silence on the channel stretched, then Salas spoke again. "Withdraw to your vessel. We will not engage." This time, the soldiers backed away, retreating through the hatch. A moment later, the patrol ship disengaged, thrusters flaring as it turned back toward the void. When the hatch sealed, Rivari's shoulders eased, though her breathing was heavy from the stun impact. She sank down onto the deck, wincing but keeping her eyes on Elias. "You risk too much," she said quietly. He knelt beside her, checking the singed lines along her side. "And you think I'd just watch them take you?" For a moment, neither spoke. The station around them groaned softly, the only witness to the exchange. Then Rivari's voice softened in a way he had never heard before. "In my language, there's a word, life bond. It means one who has tied their fate to yours, without demand, without bargain. Now you are that to me." Elias didn't answer immediately. The weight of the words settled over him, not as a burden, but as a truth that had been forming since the first moment he set foot in Hangar 9. Outside, the patrol ship vanished into the starfield. Somewhere ahead lay Varati space, and whatever future waited for them there. For now, it was enough to know that the choice he had made, the one no one else had dared, had bound him to something far greater than his own survival. The first warning came as a flicker in the skiff's navigational readout, barely a blip like static interference. Elias thought it was debris scatter until the anomaly aligned with their course, holding pace as though tethered to them by an invisible thread. He didn't need to glance at Rivari to know she had already sensed it. The faint tightening around her eyes told him enough. In the quiet hum of the cockpit, it felt as though the stars themselves were listening for what they would do next. He adjusted the skiff's vector, dipping toward a nearby belt of fractured ice asteroids, hoping the reflective glare would mask their signature. The anomaly followed. "They've got a tracker on us," he said, his voice low. No other way they'd stay locked as clean. Rivari leaned forward, her long fingers tracing projection on the console. "Virathi do not waste pursuit on strays," she said. "Whoever follows us is not them." The way she said it carried a weight, something between warning and memory. Hours stretched under a constant, silent chase. Elias rerouted power from the secondary life support system to boost their sensor jamming, but the skiff was not built for outrunning anything military grade. Their only advantage lay in the fact that whatever tailed them seemed content to keep its distance, as though hurting rather than attacking. It was only when the anomaly signal split into three that Elias realized they were being corralled toward a fixed point in space. That point appeared as a dead ship, a hulking freighter drifting with no active power signature. Its hull was pitted from micrometeor impacts, one side peeled open like the rind or rotted fruit. "Derelict?" Elias asked. Rivari's answer was a slow shake of her head. "Bait." Her hand drifted toward the emergency release for her restraints, a habit he'd noticed whenever she sensed danger she couldn't yet see. "We can't run?" he asked. She tilted her head toward the readout. 3 bright dots closing in behind them. Not from 3. Elias brought the skiff in on a cautious vector, engines barely above idle. The derelict's yawning wound gave way to a hangar bay filled with shadow. He eased them inside, the docking clamps engaging with sound far too loud in the hollow space. As soon as the ramp lowered, the stale air of the freighter spilled into the skiff, a faint tang of ozone, and something older, metallic. Rivari stepped out first, her frame unfolding to full height. Even in the gloom, she moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone prepared to strike. They hadn't crossed half the bay before the lights snapped on in a sudden cascade. Figures emerged from the shadows, humanoid, armored in mismatched plating, their weapons a patchwork of stolen tech. The leader stepped forward, helmet off, revealing a face weathered like old leather and eyes that had long since lost a habit of warmth. Elias Merrick. The man said, his tone more statement than greeting. "You've been hard to find." Elias's gut tightened. He knew that voice. Captain Dravik, once a smuggler who'd run routes near the mining colonies Elias had serviced, now apparently playing a much more dangerous game. "Not here for me," Elias said, though the words felt flimsy even as he spoke them. Dravik's gaze slid toward Rivari. "Her, then. I'd heard the outpost caught one. Didn't think they'd let her slip. And now here you are, hand-delivering." His smile was all teeth. "There's a price on her you wouldn't believe." Elias stepped slightly in front of her, pulse hammering. "You'd have to go through me." Dravik chuckled, the sound carrying no humor. "That's the plan." The standoff fractured in an instant. Rivari moved, faster than anyone in the bay seemed prepared for. Her arm swept one man off his feet, his rifle skittering across the deck. Elias dove for cover behind a cargo crate, grabbing the dropped weapon and firing toward the catwalk where 2 more figures leveled their sights. The air filled with the hiss of energy discharges and the metallic tang of ionized particles. Through it all, Rivari was a blur of motion, her massive form weaving between attackers with impossible precision. A bolt seared past Elias's cheek, close enough that the heat made his skin prickle. He swung the rifle toward the source, dropping the shooter before the next shot could come. The bay rang with shouts, the clash of metal, the heavy thud of bodies hitting deck. When silence finally returned, it was ragged, filled only by the hum of emergency lights cycling down. Dravik lay unconscious near the base of the catwalk, his crew scattered or fleeing. Rivari straightened, her breathing steady despite the chaos. She glanced at Elias, and for the first time since their escape, there was a glint in her eyes that might have been approval, or perhaps something more difficult to name. "They will not stop," she said simply. Elias nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Then we keep moving." They stripped what they could from the freighter. Fuel cells, a fresher rebreather, even a small cache of unmarked ration packs. As they made for the skiff, Elias felt the weight of a new understanding pressing in. They weren't just running from a single threat. Rivari's presence had put them on the radar of hunters who saw her as either prize or weapon. And in some unspoken way, he realized she had just decided he was worth keeping alive in return. When the skiff cleared the derelict's bay, the stars opened up before them again, cold and endless. Somewhere behind, in the black, Dravik's columns would already be calling allies. Somewhere ahead lay the thin line between hunted and free. Elias didn't know yet which side they would land on, but he felt the shift inside him, a resolve that no outpost order or smuggler's bounty could bend. He glanced at Rivari, her gaze fixed forward, and thought that perhaps, for the first time, they were not running from something but toward it. The skiff's nav screen bled with crimson warnings as another gravity well bloomed on the edge of their plotted course. Elias slammed the heel of his hand against the console, but the readings didn't change. The gravity spike was deliberate, a net cast wide enough to drag them in no matter how sharply he cut the drive. Rivari stood behind him, her silhouette framed by the dim emergency lights, gaze fixed on the viewport as if she could trap to loosen. "They're closing the gap faster than before," Elias muttered, tasting the metallic dryness of recycled air. Whoever's running this isn't playing scavenger. Outside, the darkness shifted. A shape emerged, sleek, almost predatory, its hull painted in a matte that devoured starlight. No insignias, no registry numbers. The kind of ship that lived in the space between legitimate records. As it pivoted to intercept, Elias's stomach tightened. "That's no patrol," he said. Rivari's jaw flexed. Verathi design, modified for speed. Her voice was low, but he caught the thread of something in it. Anger, perhaps, or an old grief. The ship hailed them without warning. Static cracked, then resolved into a voice, so controlled it felt surgical. "Unregistered vessel. Reduce velocity and prepare for boarding. Non-compliance will be met with termination." Elias cut the comm. "Yeah, we're not doing that." He rerouted power from the forward shields to the aft engines, feeling the skiff shudder under the strain. But the sleek craft didn't fire. Instead, it fell into a parallel course, pacing them like a predator testing prey. Minutes stretched taut. Elias was about to attempt a blind jump when Rivari moved to the co-pilot seat, her long fingers flying across the console. She keyed in a string of commands he didn't recognize, bypassing half the safeguards on the NAV system. "You're going to blow the core if you—" he started, but she cut him off. "Trust me." The skiff lurched as she engaged a micro-burn sequence, slingshotting them toward the edge of the gravity well. The pursuing craft reacted instantly, but the maneuver bought them precious seconds. They broke free just long enough to reach the edge of a debris field, remnants of an old orbital station, its twisted metal girders drifting in slow rotation. Elias threaded them through narrow gaps, hull plating groaning with each near miss. The pursuer followed, undeterred. Then the first shot came, silent, but powerful enough to light the void with a brief, blinding flare. The blast skimmed the skiff's starboard side, and the console shrieked with damage alerts. Rivari's eyes narrowed. "They're not here for you." Elias knew she was right. This was about her, and if they were Verathi or whatever hybrid crew piloted that ship, they wouldn't stop until they had her in a cage again. The thought ignited something in him, hot and ugly. Then let's make sure they regret coming this far. He swung the skiff hard left, diving deeper into the debris. Pieces of station hull and shattered satellites spun past in chaotic arcs. The pursuing craft closed in for the kill, its forward cannons charging for another shot. Rivari was already moving, unstrapping herself and heading for the access hatch to the maintenance bay. "I'll draw their targeting sensors," she called. Elias didn't ask how. He just kept them alive for as long as it took. A moment later, a massive panel on the skiff's underbelly blew free, trailing cables and sparks. Rivari launched herself into the void, tethered only by a thin mag line. In her hands, she carried a field disruptor scavenged from the derelict freighter days ago. The pursuing craft adjusted instantly, its weapons locking onto her instead of the skiff. That was all Elias needed. He flipped the skiff into a reverse spin, lining up the perfect vector between two massive chunks of drifting debris. Rivari triggered the disruptor. For a heartbeat, The pursuing ship systems faltered, the matte black hull shivering with residual energy interference. Elias slammed the throttle, sending the skiff to the narrow gap as the debris closed in behind them. The pursuing craft tried to follow, but its stuttered response left a second too slow. Two enormous station girders collided, crumpling its bow with bone-breaking force. The ship spun away, venting atmosphere into the void. By the time Rivari hauled herself back into the skiff, Elias had already set a new course, one that would take them far beyond the outer patrol lines. She collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, her breathing steady but deep, eyes locked on the receding stars. "That won't stop them," she said quietly. "It'll only make them angry." Elias met her gaze. "Good. I'm angry, too." For the first time since he'd met her, Rivari's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Not of joy, but of understanding. It was a look of someone who knew that their survival now hinged on more than running. They had drawn blood. The hunt would change, and the line between captor and prey was beginning to blur. The outer sectors had always felt wide, but now, with the Varathi vessel crippled somewhere behind them, the void seemed narrower, confining. Elias guided the skiff on a vector that kept them just shy of the main trade routes, a place where rescue was unlikely and discovery almost always meant trouble. Rivari sat silently at the co-pilot's console, hands folded, eyes fixed on the forward display. Her stillness made the cabin feel even smaller. "They'll send another," she said finally, her voice low, almost absorbed by the hum of the engines. Elias didn't look away from the viewport. "I know. Question is, will it be one ship or a fleet?" Rivari's jaw tightened. "One would be enough. The Varathi aren't like your mercenaries. They don't take prisoners to trade. They take them to erase." The word hung in the air. Erase. Not kill, not detain. Erase. Elias had heard of political vanishings on frontier worlds, but something in her tone suggested this was different, more deliberate. "And you?" he asked carefully. "They want to erase you?" Rivari didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted toward the viewport, following the shimmer of a distant nebula. "They want to erase what I know, what I am. The Varathi don't tolerate deviation. I deviated." Before Elias could press further, the skiff's proximity alarms chimed, not frantic, but steady. A contact had appeared on the far edge of their sensors. No transponder, minimal drive signature. "Another tail?" Elias asked, already adjusting course. Rivari leaned over the console, scanning. "No, too slow to be pursuit." She paused and frowned. "It's broadcasting in the old Terran deepcom bands. Nobody uses those anymore." The signal was weak but rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the static. Elias narrowed his eyes. "Distress call?" Rivari shook her head. "It's a location ping, and it's locked to us. Whoever's out there knows we're here." That was enough to sour the air between them. Elias debated shutting down their beacon and going dark, but if the signal had locked onto them once, it could do so again, and ignoring a call like that, well, his conscience didn't sit well with it, even now. Against his better judgment, he altered course toward the source. The contact resolved into a small, aged courier pod, its hull scorched and pitted. It floated dead in space, unpowered except for a faint flicker at the nose. Rivari scanned it. "Life signs," she murmured. "Faint." The skiff's docking clamps groaned as Elias brought them alongside. The pod's hatch yielded reluctantly, releasing a breath of stale, metallic air. Inside, a single figure was strapped to a crash couch. Human male, barely conscious. When his eyes fluttered open, they went first to Elias, then locked on Rivari with something between fear and recognition. "You!" His voice cracked, the word hanging there unfinished. Rivari stepped forward slowly, her expression unreadable. "I know you," she said, though it sounded less like memory and more like realization. They brought him aboard. The man's name was Terran, a former comms analyst for an independent mining consortium that had operated in the fringe zones until the Varathi shut them down. His story came in fragments, each one coaxed out between sips of recycled water. He spoke of intercepted transmissions, encrypted manifests, and something he called the Black Accord, an unspoken pact between certain human factions and the Verathi to trade in captives, resources, and secrets. Elias felt the skin on the back of his neck prickle. So you're saying some of our own are helping them? Terran nodded weakly. Helping, protecting, profiting. His gaze slid to Rivari. And you're the key to breaking it. Elias looked between them, a growing unease coiling in his gut. What does that mean? Rivari didn't answer. Not immediately. She rose from her seat, moving to stand near the viewport again. It means, she said at last, that the Verathi will burn through 100 ships to silence me, and anyone near me when they do. Her reflection in the glass was a shadow framed by distant starlight, and Elias could almost see the weight pressing on her shoulders. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was a pause before the storm. Terran's arrival hadn't just brought information. It had shifted the ground beneath their feet. The enemy wasn't only chasing them. It was inside human space, inside human systems, its influence stretching further than Elias had ever dared imagine. He met Rivari's gaze when she turned back, and for the first time, he saw something he hadn't before, not just resolve, but a flicker of doubt. It was enough to make him wonder if the real danger wasn't the Verathi ship that might appear on their tail tomorrow, but the slow realization that the void they were running through was already compromised, already theirs. The first warning came not as a blaring alarm, but as a subtle drop in the skiff's power output, a stutter so faint it might have gone unnoticed if Elias hadn't spent half his life listening to ships breathe. He glanced at the console, fingers moving quickly over the diagnostics. We've got a bleed in the reactor line. It's not from damage, it's deliberate. Rivari moved to his side in 2 long steps. Deliberate, she repeated. Elias nodded grimly. Something's drawing off power without authorization. Internal, not external. He didn't have to say the word. Sabotage. Terran, strapped into the jump seat with a blanket around his shoulders, stirred uneasily. You think it's me? His voice cracked, equal parts exhaustion and resentment. Elias didn't answer right away, because the truth was, he didn't know who to suspect. The ship shuddered, faintly but insistently. Somewhere in the aft compartment, a hatch slammed shut automatically, sealing off one of the auxiliary bays. Rivari's expression hardened. Stay here, she ordered Terran, her tone the kind that didn't invite argument. Elias followed her aft, both of them moving with the wary silence of people expecting the worst. The auxiliary bay was dim, lit only by emergency strips along the floor. A cold haze hung in the air, thin but acrid. Elias crouched by the reactor manifold, tracing the telltale heat signature with a handheld scanner. His heart sank. This wasn't just sabotage. Someone tried to piggyback a signal through our power lines. A broadcast, short-range, high-frequency. Rivari swore under her breath. A beacon. Elias met her gaze. Which means they know exactly where we are. The implications crashed down on them at once. The Verathi didn't need to search anymore. They just had to close in. And if Terran had brought this aboard, knowingly or not, then everything since docking with his pod had been a slow march toward their own capture. Back in the cockpit, the proximity display lit up with 3 incoming contacts, no transponders, closing fast. Not Verathi warships. These were smaller, sleeker, built for interception. Elias didn't recognize the design, but Rivari did. Human, she said grimly. Privateers. They work for whoever pays most, and right now that's the Accord. The lead ship hailed them, voice crackling over the comm. Unidentified skiff. Cut your engines and prepare for boarding. We have no quarrel with your pilot, but the passenger comes with us. The words were smooth, practiced, but Elias caught the steel under them. Rivari leaned forward, her voice sharp as broken glass. Tell your buyer they can send a fleet. They'll still fail. Elias cut the channel before the reply came. We can't outrun them, he said. But maybe we can outthink them. His hands flew across the controls, initiating a burn toward a dense asteroid cluster just off their course. The skiff dove into the tumbling field of rock and dust, engines straining against inertia. The pursuing ships followed, though their formation broke as they wove through chaos. Rivari took the gunnery station without asking, eyes fixed on the targeting scopes. She waited until the lead privateer ship skimmed dangerously close to a drifting slab of nickel iron, then fired a tight burst that shattered the rock into a blinding spray. The ship veered, colliding with a smaller fragment that tore through one of its stabilizers. Its drive sputtered, spinning it out into the void. 2 remained. Elias threaded them deeper into the field, using the asteroids as shields. Terran, still in the jump seat, shouted something about a signal disruptor he'd carried in his pod, a device that could jam short-range comms if they could power it. Rivari hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Get it. Now!" With the disruptor hooked into the skiff systems, Elias triggered it mid-maneuver. A wave of static rolled outward, blotting out the enemy's coordination. The 2 ships faltered, their movements losing sync. Rivari pounced, taking one down with a precision shot that ripped its port engine clean. The last turned tail, vanishing into the asteroid belt shadows. The silence that followed felt almost too sudden. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Rivari didn't relax. "They weren't Verathi," she said, "which means the Accord knows exactly where we are, and they'll send more." This was just the first net. Terran swallowed hard, looking between them. Then, "We need to go somewhere they can't follow. Somewhere off every chart." Elias glanced at Rivari, who gave the faintest nod. "There's one place," she said quietly. "But if we go there, we don't come back the same." She didn't elaborate, and Elias didn't ask. Not yet. The skiff turned slowly, angling toward a sector Elias had only heard of in half-joking, half-fearful whispers. A place ships entered but rarely returned from. The NAV display marked it with a single word, Drosshaven. The void ahead seemed darker already.